I'm Sister Catherine Huber. Everyone calls me Sister Kathy. My vocation story began in the family. I'm the 7th of 11 children. My mother was Mary and my father was Joseph. Can't beat that, can you? The family was a religious family, very much lived the gospel of, God and neighbor. Also grew up in this little community called Starlight, where the civic community and the church community was one and the same. Neighbor helped neighbor. My mother told me I talked about becoming a sister was in the 4th grade. I do not remember that. But what I do remember is in the 7th grade, we had a sister in the parish, was not my teacher, and she was a young sister. And I greatly admired her. She related to everyone, the young, the old. On Sunday, you would see her praying the office as she was getting ready to play the organ. And I thought, in the 7th grade, we were sitting on the desk and she came in and she didn't say, "Get off the desk." I thought, now when I become a sister, that's the kind I want to be. I went to our academy, never had much of a thought about becoming a sister. While I was in the academy, my oldest sister became a Maryknoll sister, and would go to her profession and investings and things like that. And then I would think, oh, maybe I should be a Maryknoll sister. But I'd come back to the academy and I'd see my teachers singing in the schola and then teaching us. And I could not articulate it at the time, but at the time it was that whole thing of prayer and service, ora et labora. And then when I was a senior, I thought, I need to make up my mind what I want to do. And I remember saying to my dad, I want to go enter the convent, as we called it then. And he says, don't you think you should wait a year? I probably could have, but I said, well, I know what I want to do, and he didn't say any more. So at the ripe age of 18, I entered the monastery. I remember standing in the pickle patch. I grew up on a family fruit and vegetable farm, standing in the pickle patch and saying, I wonder what I will do someday, and thought I'd probably be a teacher all my life. So that's how I entered the monastery. And in the monastery, I had, yes, I was a teacher. I was a principal. I was a retreat director. I became prioress. I became Federation president. And life just kept on, kept on, and kept on. It's been a great journey. We were among the first group of sisters who stayed home and earned our bachelor's degree before we went out to teach. My first teaching experience was at St. Meinrad Grade School, and I had 48 second graders. Do you think that's, well, I bet those 48 second graders are easier than the kids our teachers teach today. I was four years teaching second grade, and then I went to Montgomery and taught 8th grade for 3 years. By this time, I'm also working on my master's degree in education from the University of Dayton. At the end of those years of teaching, then I was asked to become a principal at Ireland Elementary School. Later on, it became part of the Jasper school system. Those years at Ireland, those 10 years at Ireland were wonderful years. It was a time when the church, not the church, but the school and family worked together for the kids. It was wonderful. I loved my years there. And then I went to Holy Redeemer and served for 4 years in the Catholic school system. At the end of 14 years of being principal, I thought, there's more to life than this. And I found out what used to wash off my back no longer washed off my back. But I loved education. I loved the kids. They were fun. They were fun. I really enjoyed those years. My time as prioress was from 1989 to 1998. I served 2 terms. When I went into the discernment and election for prioress in 1989, I was clueless that I might be elected the prioress. But as the whole process unfolded, it was a marvelous, marvelous process. I remember going to bed that one night, and it was down to 2 of us, and I thought, Kathy, this might be reality. But it still did not seem real. I went to bed and just slept. But the next morning in morning prayer, the reality hit me that I could be elected the prioress. I remember going back into that discernment, and the facilitator said, this is what you say you need in your prioress. You need someone who can be the spiritual leader of the community and someone who could meet the publics. And before I realized that, I found myself saying, and if called, I could do it. And it was a great call to serve. The community was wonderful. People I asked to serve in various positions, everyone said yes. So I was truly, truly blessed in that regard. We were a community of about 275 at that time. And so yes, that was a full plate. One of the first big challenges is when my predecessor, Sister Mary Walter, was killed in a car accident 9 months after my election. One of my images of that time was like 9 months, Bertha. The umbilical cord was cut. About the time I had enough experience to ask her questions as she was gone. And we had a couple other challenging deaths as well. While I was prioress, 39 sisters died. And it was a great, great blessing. Death is not anything I fear today, but being at the deathbed of so many sisters, when the moment comes, we're always at peace. Another great accomplishment during that time was reclaiming that we are monastic. We reclaimed the word monastery. We reclaimed the fact that we are monastic women. I remember saying to the sisters, this is who we say we are, now we have to live into it. And again, great opportunities. At that time, we also had 4 dependent monasteries. One in Guatemala, one in Peru, one in Louisiana, and one in Martin, Kentucky. And now we have 1. 2 of those have become independent, 1 closed, and we still have our dependent monastery in Peru. And that's a great enrichment too. I remember one of our sisters saying in the chapter, this is before I was elected, she said, a monastery always has great impact in the community in which it is located. How are we impacting the local community? Well, our sisters have been impacting the local community for years and years. But during this time, we also developed a very strong relationship with the town of Ferdinand, with the county, got them very involved in different organizations. Our sisters, in their teaching, in their pastoral ministry, in their health ministry, have always greatly impacted the local community. And of course, during the 90s, you remember all that was going on in the world? So we do a lot of praying too. Part of our mission statement says, we join our brothers and sisters in creating a world of peace. And Pax is one of the Benedictine words, peace. And we continue to pray for peace in our world. And more and more and more and more, our world is more and more chaotic. The world needs the wisdom and the of monastic life and all that it has to offer. How do we live together? How do we not only tolerate each other, but how do we welcome the stranger? And how do we become more and more inclusive in our relationships? The ministry I'm involved in today is spirituality ministry with a focus on spiritual direction. A more proper word would be spiritual companioning. It's companioning people on their journey as they search for God and search for meaning in their life. And I have wonderful people that I work with. I have, Catholic men and women, Protestant men and women. I also have a Muslim woman who considers me her spiritual mentor. I also companion a woman who is incarcerated for life. These people deeply enrich my life and how they find the presence of God in their lives. Every time I walk into the Ohio Reformatory for Women, I remember St. Benedict's word. We believe the divine presence is everywhere. And when I walk into that facility, I'm very aware of that. I'm very aware of God's presence and activity in the woman I companion who is in that system. Another enriching experience for me is I'm part of an Islamic study group, and learning more about what the Quran really does say and does not say. It is so enriching, so enriching. There are many paths to God, and many Christian paths to God, as well as our Jewish brothers and sisters and our Muslim brothers and sisters and Buddhists and Hindus and so on. I am greatly enriched. I would like to share a little bit about my friend Alice, who currently is incarcerated for life in the Ohio Reformatory for Women. Personally, I don't think she belongs there for life, but that's another story. I was first introduced to Alice by an oblate, Shirley France. I was mentoring Shirley for the oblate program, and she would frequently talk about Alice, a woman she was working with in the prison. And Alice would often say to Shirley, "And what are you learning now? What are you learning now?" And after about the fourth time, I said, "Shirley, you tell Alice if she wants to be an oblate, I would be honored to be her mentor." And permission was given. And at that time, I was as a volunteer, so we had to do all of our correspondence in writing. And I have a folder about that thick of Alice's writings on what it means to be an oblate. And she is a wonderful, wonderful woman. When she entered that prison 33 years ago, she was a very broken woman, had been in a very, very abusive marriage, and that's another whole story. But over time, with help from the wardens and the chaplains and different staff people in the prison, she began growing into wholeness and holiness. It was such a privilege to be with Alice, and still is a privilege to be with Alice. I moved from volunteer to visitor, so now I get to visit Alice, and visitor also means we can email back and forth in a program in the prison they call JPay. And this woman is just a marvelous woman, and the difference that she is making in that prison. She helps women as they prepare to go before the parole board and tell the story. She is attentive to the women who first to come into the prison and scared to death, and kind of takes them under wing. We correspond at least twice a week. I try to get up to the Ohio Reformatory several times a year. Of course, COVID has prevented that recently. But if you ever have the chance, get involved in prison ministry. Good people there. We always have to differentiate between the person and behavior. God is in the person, and oftentimes our brokenness is exhibited through our behavior. Another new venture of mine is I have become part of an Islamic study group. This came about several years ago when I was contacted by someone who said, there is a Muslim woman who wants to do a program on Mary in the Holy Quran and Mary in the Christian scriptures. And I said, well, I could do that. And that was the beginning of a great relationship with Dr. Rafat Hassan, who is a retired professor in Islamic Studies at the University of Louisville. A woman who is so open, who is very involved in interfaith dialogue, does a lot of sharing with me in her own journey. And I'm just learning so much. I keep saying to everybody, there are many paths to God, many paths to God. And this is one of them. I grew up in a family of 11 children. I said earlier, my mother was Mary, my father was Joseph, and they had 11 little Jesuses. Well, not quite. After I entered the community, I thought, well, I have lived community all my life. I grew up on a family farm where we all contributed and we all received. That's a value in Benedictine life. The family was a place where we grew together. We fought together, of course, as kids. But parents always taught us to respect, and to respect anyone who was different than we were. My mother was very involved in, I remember during World War II, she was very involved in making bandages and things like that. Another thing, in my family, there's 20 years difference between the oldest and the youngest. And my brothers were of age that they were involved in 3 different wars. My oldest brother was drafted right at the end of World War II. He was in boot camp preparing for the invasion of Japan when they ran him in and said, Japan has surrendered, throw your hat in the air one time and go back and keep on training. My next brother was in the Korean conflict. It wasn't a Korean war, it was a Korean conflict. And he was wounded there. And I remember my mother received a letter one time saying to her, Mom, keep on praying because it's more than luck keeping me alive here. I was in the 8th grade when he came home. We didn't know about post-traumatic stress syndrome in those days, but I could see he was a different guy. And then my youngest brother was in the Vietnam War, and my 2 oldest brothers who were in the Marines and who were in the Army said, don't wait to be drafted, volunteer for the Navy. And so he volunteered for the Navy, and he was on the Intrepid, which did a lot of the bombing of Vietnam, including Agent Orange. Today he has all kind of problems related to that. But my mother always said, you don't need to talk to me about war. She had 3 sons who were involved in all that. I realized as time went on how lucky I was to grow up in the family that I grew up in. All of us were born during the Great Depression or World War II, and how my parents handled all of that. As my mother said, we were poor, but everyone else was too. But I learned in my family all those values that later on was taught as Benedictines, hospitality. You never came into our house unless my mother fed you. I remember my dad too. My brother worked with this was in the 50s, he worked with a black man who wanted to go hunting, but he said, I don't know where to hunt. And my brother says, my dad will let you hunt on our farm. So great hospitality. All were welcome in the family that I grew up in. I entered the convent at the age of 18. In 1976, my brothers and sisters sent my mother on a European trip. None of them had gone yet, but they wanted her to go before she got too old. She was 76 at the time. And then I get a call and said, could you companion her? And I got to know my mother in another whole way that I did not get to know in any other way. And then I also learned what gift is. My mother earned that trip. I never did anything for my brothers and sisters to earn that trip. But I learned the value of gift. And family is such a gift. I remember on that trip, we would drink wine. Of course, if you're in Italy, you're going to drink wine, right? And my mother says, where'd you learn to drink? I said, I guess when you sent me to that German monastery. My dad would make some little homemade wine. We were kids, and he'd have a beer, And we all run with a glass, and he put about that much beer in our little glass, and we go fill it with water, and we really thought we had something. That was my extent of drinking before I came to the monastery. Later on, in the 80s, when there was this great downturn in the economics, the farmers up there knew they needed to diversify. My brother diversified by starting a restaurant. My cousins diversified by starting a winery. And to this date, the winery keeps our community in wine. And now with their distillery, we have spirits for New Year's Eve too. We all know that wine was very important in the life of Jesus, don't we? He went to parties, he turned water into wine. At the Last Supper, he consecrated the wine into his body and blood, which we do all the time too. So, the bread and wine are very sacred symbols. Hebrew restaurant, the bread; Hebrew winery, the wine. And we do that, And right now during COVID, we are not partaking in the cup at the Eucharist. I miss that. I wait for the day when we can do that. And like everything, in moderation. We serve wine on special occasions in the community. One of the very special occasions is a feast of St. John. When I first entered the community, that was the only day of the year that wine was served to the community. And, St. John talks about love. And he talks about, the Last Supper, the washing of the feet, all that too. But how we are to serve. And today, the Hebrew winery is serving many people, serving many congregations, doing a lot of youth work and all that. So we are very blessed, but we have wine more than once a year now. We will have it on the Feast of Benedict and on the Feast of Scholastica and on Easter and Christmas. But in many monasteries, wine is served every day, but not in our community.